Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This is episode 234.
Yeah, we talk with Kevin Van Meter, author of Guerrillas of Desire.
This is the second time we've had him on, so thank you so much for coming on again. And I just got to say, I got this book through the Friends of AK Press. It's amazing. Everyone should definitely check it out. But stick tuned for Kevin.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
And this is typically where we would have our side. We've been on a bit of a hiatus lately. Want to apologize for that. We've all sort of been busy with life. I was on the VegFest planning committee, so that's kind of been consuming my life lately. But that just wrapped up. Thanks for everyone who showed up.
Met quite a few fans. Thank you for stopping by the table. We had phenomenal success. So yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks for understanding the hiatus. So, well, thanks for being on again. We were looking at the dates, almost 2 years to the day since you were on.
It feels like we did this not too long ago. So yeah, right. I think June 2015, I looked at the episode number. I'm like, 138. What are they up to now?
Yeah,
shit.
Yeah, exactly. So what
230 something.
Yeah. What the hell have you been up to in the last 2 years?
Writing this stupid book, I guess. That chronic illness, dealing with the fact the economy is fucked and work is impossible to come by in Portland, Oregon. I mean, the usual. So, I've been working on this book for 10 years on and off. Really, the Institute of Anarchist Studies approached me 2 years ago to do a project like this, and it was just too big of an opportunity to turn down. So I've been working on this for about 2 years and writing it for pretty much the last year and a half.
Well, I mean, you called it a stupid book, and I'm one of the Friends of AK Press, so we get everything they come out with, and sometimes the books you get, you're like, okay, I'm glad I have it, but I probably won't read it. I was actually really excited to get this one.
Oh, rad!
So yeah, I wouldn't quite call it a stupid book.
Well, that I appreciate. I mean, when you spend 2 years of your life doing something and then it arrives, it's super freaking exciting. And then you're also like, oh man, it's so nice out. I just want to go take a swim in the river or take a bike ride or go eat something. But no, now I got to do the next one or look through and find the errors that I left in and stuff along those lines. So I appreciate your kind words.
So I did 10 years, started working 2 years. Was it just like small writings in between? Or is it just, hey, I want to do this? Was it just like this idea that you always wanted to do for the previous 8 years?
Well, that is a little bit of a complex and personal story. So as a young organizer, I was always interested in some of these subjects. I'm 39 now, and I started doing this stuff at 17, 18. And mostly doing punk shows, running a venue, participating in the anti-globalization movement, doing DIY flea markets, vegan outreach, the usual type stuff, anything from food not bombs to day labor support demonstrations, right? The kind of typical early activist stuff that folks might turn to in their late teens, early 20s. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that I could never properly answer is, where do organizers come from? Why do people get involved in these things? Like, what happened in their actual lives? And it seemed that every organizing manual I turned to, any older organizer I spoke with, folks who had done this stuff for 30, 40 years, they would talk about, and even many radicals and militants would talk about how you build a bigger organization, how you create a coalition, how do you network nationally or internationally together on things. And honestly, I was more concerned on the organization all the way down, looking the other direction, right? Like, what brings people to get involved in these things? And then, of course, the question is like, what brings people to not get involved in the kind of activities radical revolutionary and otherwise, that we're involved in. So I started asking these questions a long time ago as a young organizer to try to figure out how we build better organizations, how we build better revolutionary movements and struggles. And I never really got a satisfying answer, and I still don't think I have a satisfying answer now. But since I had been asking those questions for a long time, I started reading kind of outside the radical milieu and looking at other kinds of history. So as a young punk anarchist, you read Chomsky, you read the ABCs of anarchism, read things along those lines. And I didn't find any answers there. So I started reading among these various autonomous Marxists. I read anthropologist James Scott that looks at peasant everyday resistance. You could look at historian Robin D.G. Kelly, who's written about his own experiences working in a shitty job at McDonald's and stealing food, and how that reflects this whole history of Black liberation and Black struggle. So I started kind of digging around to try to find other answers to these questions. And in 2004, I ended up going to grad school for a few years at the City University of New York, partially to kind of read this material that I never had enough time to do while working 2 nonprofit jobs and running a venue and doing activist stuff. And I did that in order to be able to develop an intellectual project. Well, in 2007, I left grad school because my partner at the time was sick. And that project kind of got stalled out. So while I was writing and in grad school, this was going to be a master's thesis originally. Just a check in the box, right? Like something I wanted to do, something I wanted to read. Here's an opportunity to do it. And so in 2004 through 2007, I was actively researching and reading about these issues, writing about them under the tutelage of an advisor. And then after my partner got sick in 2007, I actually ended up leaving New York, where I was living shortly thereafter, and ended up in Portland, Oregon. And in that period between 2007 and the present, I really just kept coming across more and more material, right? Like I didn't even look for shit and I'd find things about everyday resistance or how people survive, or how there was this book somehow I missed just on forms of survival among slave women, about how women in the American South, Black slave women, would resist the advances and other impositions on the slave household and on their own bodies, right? So I just kept coming across more and more and more and more material. And then I found theoretical stuff that addressed this. I found histories that addressed this. You could go through various ethnographies of people just talking about their jobs and how much they suck. And you'll find people talking about resisting or kinds of organization that exists on the job or in their lives. So I just kept accruing more and more material kind of in that 10-year period. And in 2012, I went back to grad school, which was a terrible life choice, but I didn't see much of an option work-wise. And then in 2014, I finished the original master's thesis with one of my advisors. So I had this manuscript and I had spent all this time collecting work and all this stuff. And the thing that sucks about the academy is you write bullshit, usually that no one should ever read, but then it sits in some file someplace. And the reason that I was interested in these questions in the first place was, what does everyday resistance contribute to revolutionary struggle and revolutionary movements? So in talking about it with the friends of mine at Institute of Anarchist Studies, they're like, how about you do a book? And how about you do a book with our series with AK? So I was like, oh shit, I've spent a good portion of my adult life reading about this stuff. Let me turn this into something that's going to be useful. So I took what was a dry, boring, and useless academic text and turned it into hopefully something that is not, and something that's readable, and something that answers questions I wanted to answer, and also helps radicals think through where we are currently. So that's kind of where the book came, and feel free to cut out a whole bunch of that bullshit as needed. I wish it was a slightly more exciting story. Sadly, it is not. It's one of those things that you keep going back to because you're somewhat obsessive with it and just want to finish it. So that's kind of where the last 10 years have taken me. And in a lot of ways, the questions of where do organizers emerge out of? How are people radicalized and get involved in radical movements? What kind of life experiences speak to people's interests, desires, and needs when they come into revolutionary radical movements? And also, how do these new kind of developments emerge, right? We're seeing a huge development in Antifa movements across the United States. What's that coming out of, right? What are people's prior experiences? And I'm not so much interested in like, how do we network these groups together to create a large coalition on the national level and that kind of bullshit. I want to know how people get involved in the first place and how people emerge out of their experiences into other levels of organization or activity. And I think that's an important question because I think it's that motor that is going to shift the tide and build substantive revolutionary movements in the U.S.
So taking that aspect, looking inwards into yourself, what got you motivated and radicalized to actually become an activist?
Well, there are a couple of things. One of my early and only childhood memories, and I have a whole bunch of concussions from police batons and playing hockey and skiing and doing dumb shit as a kid. So I don't have a ton of childhood memories, but one of them that actually remains is that my father took me to work, must have been 5 or 6. We lived in suburban Long Island. He commuted to New York, as many, many people do. And I commuted into the city with him. And at some point during this day, we took a cab ride. And the cab is stopped, I think, around Columbus Circle and Broadway. At least that's how he remembers it. And I'm a little kid standing in the back of the cab, staring out the window. And all of a sudden, a panhandler, a homeless gentleman, comes up to the window. And he's staring at me and I'm staring at him. And I don't know what my 5 or 6-year-old mind thought, but the way I've always remembered it is seeing this person and feeling their need for human connection and their desperation for basic resources. And I just couldn't understand as a 5-year-old, and I can't understand now how we could live in such a shit fucking society that would allow human beings to not have access to the basic substance of life, right? Yeah. In order to subsist, to exist, to eat, et cetera, et cetera. So that early childhood memory always stuck with me, and I ended up working for the Coalition of the Homeless in Long Island as a result in my early activist years. And also, as a teenager, I had this cyclical vomiting syndrome. I was like horribly ill. It prevented me from doing anything fun for a number of years. And one of the only things that addressed this cyclical vomiting syndrome was smoking weed. And it just like pissed me off as a young teen that like I couldn't just fucking smoke weed and feel better because that was illegal. And it wasn't illegal for any legitimate reason. It was illegal because it was a way of and mechanism of social control. Mm-hmm. So a couple of those things growing up radicalized me. Speaking to female friends as a young high school student and hearing about their experiences with intimate violence, with sexual harassment, et cetera, radicalized me as well. And thinking about like, how do we allow half the population, at least this was my consciousness at the time, half the population to undergo this kind of ongoing and constant abuse and violence. Not to mention the ongoing constant abuse and violence against gender conforming folks, trans folks, and others. So these kind of sensitivities and these kinds of issues were bubbling up for me as a late teen. And then when I started to get involved in the DIY punk scene and went vegetarian and vegan and got involved in all these other kind of activities, it just kind of codified for me. It was very clear that the kind of world we lived in was totally insufficient in regards to human needs and desires, and the levels of violence that existed in anywhere from factory farms to factories to street corners and bedrooms was just unacceptable. So that was my initial kind of turn into these activities. And when I do interviews with activists or militants, philosophers, and others, I always ask about that process because I think you actually find out some really, really interesting things about people when you speak about how they started to come into political movements, why they got involved, what was missing in their lives, what they wanted to address in the larger society. And that kind of project has kind of always stuck with me.
I love the idea of an ongoing storytelling project of just, the origins of people, like what really brought you into it. Because those are always the deep underlining things that keep you motivated and going forward, right?
Exactly.
We find that a lot of times punk is such an underlying thing. It's so strange to think about. Punk really is a threat.
Yes. And not just again, like it always was, it still is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that idea of not being able to have that social control, right? That non-conforming, I think, it gives you that outlet of expression. But I mean, I don't think punk is the only thing that has created that either.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
No, certainly. I mean, hip hop, dance music, there's so many different avenues. And I think what's interesting about that kind of formulation, about the contribution that DIY punk and hip hop had to, say, the anti-globalization movement, right? To third wave feminism and Riot Girl. All these kind of developments, in fact, come out of these larger kinds of collective life. I think we just presume that someone one day picks up something or listens to a record and becomes radicalized. But the process is actually, in fact, a lot more complicated. And there's a lot of other individuals that are involved in this larger set of collective life that don't necessarily become radicals, but aren't, or, don't do direct action, don't participate in radical revolutionary movements, but are part of this larger cultural and political milieu. And I think the kind of collective life that we want to create is not that every single person needs to identify as an anarchist or a radical or a vegan or what have you, but in fact, that the work that revolutionary movements and others are doing are situated within communities. That, in fact, and we talked about this 2 years ago, the reason that we were able to beat the Green Scare charges on Long Island back in 2004 was not necessarily because we were the best organized or, had the best arguments, et cetera, but in fact, we were so indebted to the larger community of which we are a part. So it wasn't just that one individual was facing charges or one community was under attack, or one organization of anarchists were being surveilled and repressed, but in fact, those individuals were part of a larger community of older activists, of peace activists, of folks that were organizing day laborers, those who were fighting racism and suing the cops, that it wasn't just a bunch of punk kids that showed up to trial or to resist repression, but it was a whole community of folks, of religious folks, of older folks, et cetera, et cetera. And the way of which our movements are going to be successful, are going to resist repression, are going to be able to self-reproduce, that is, like, reproduce themselves over and over and over again, is to be able to be situated within these larger processes of collective life. If your movements and activism is what you do in addition to your rest of your life, and if actually the rest of your life is not improved, then there is no way that these are going to sustain themselves, and there's no way these are going to make substantive changes. So I think the kind of collective life that DIY punk and other subcultures provide is at least a starting point for people to be involved in these kind of activities. But unfortunately, at least in the United States, subcultures are very often see themselves against the dominant culture, separate from the rest of collective life, et cetera, et cetera. And honestly, like, I don't care who at the community garden is punk or not punk, or like what they listen to, or if they believe in God or not. But that kind of process of collective life allows for our movements to situate themselves, to reproduce themselves, and also have relationships with people outside of some simple political identification.
So you mentioned that whenever you have like interviews, you always want to talk about people origins and such. So in all those conversations, is there any one that kind of just always has stuck out to you?
There are. I probably can't identify the individuals. There are a couple. There is a friend of mine, older feminist, who in the 60s and 70s used to have to bind their chest in order to pass as male in order to participate in radical movements. and how that kind of experience, fundamentally, when they were able to reflect on it as it's unfolding, literally changed their entire life in regards to understanding the role of feminist struggle. That if this person had to, in fact, present as male in order to participate in movements in the 60s and 70s, had to convince others they were male in order to do such, it very much limited the opportunity of women and then folks who, quote unquote, couldn't pass to participate in these movements. So to listen to a noted feminist in their 70s talk about the kind of sacrifices and the kind of limitations that were placed upon them in revolutionary movements of 40 years ago, and knowing that a lot of those barriers still exist, is something that is constantly reflected, or something that I constantly reflect on. How, in fact, radical movements in the United States have become more welcoming, more supportive of people's various identities and presentations. But in fact, some of the struggles that we're dealing with now are 40, 50-year-old struggles. I'm trying not to identify this individual because I'm not sure if this is a story they want told. But
and we can cut anything you need to if you want.
Yeah, we might want to cut that out. Let me start that again, only because so I'm doing another book project right now, of which this interview is part of, and I've not gotten permission to do it. So let me start that again. Okay. So you're asking about, is there a particular story from interviewing or speaking to activists? And I do this informally as well, right? Like, I'm going to be at a friend's going away party tonight, and this is a conversation that if I meet somebody new, I will totally bother them about. But how do people become radicalized? How do people become other than what society has made them to be, right? So in the book, I use an example from a dear friend of mine. He was a young punk kid. I must have been 18, 19. He was 14, 15. We're both in suburban Long Island, involved in DIY punk and activism and the like. And he hated school, as most or many radicals I know, hated high school. And after school, he would sweep floors at a chain supermarket. And I tell the story in the introduction. As he started to get involved in punk and radical politics, he realized that the reason that he was resisting the kind of schooling he was getting at the public schools in suburban Long Island, and the reason that he was resisting at work, is that he needed to do both these things. He needed to finish school in order to survive, and he needed to have this kind of low-paying job in order to survive. But neither of those things really address his needs and desires. His desire to participate in larger communities, to listen to punk music, to read about radical movements, to be involved in collective life. So neither of those experiences allowed him to do that, but he had to do those. So he was resisting those kind of experiences. He's refusing the imposition of work at school. He's refusing the imposition of work at this chain supermarket. And in that refusal, he's also trying to participate and create space and time for himself to be involved in collective life. Well, my buddy Tom is now a PhD student at the City University of New York. He teaches sociology. And one of the things he said to me is that it was that experience of refusing work and creating collective life, of understanding that compulsory schooling and some shit job was not going to satisfy the complex array of needs and desires that he had. It's that experience that has allowed him to become a intellectual, a professor, a writer, a thinker, an engaged human being, right? And observing what was taking place on Long Island at that time, he just knew that being raised male, being raised Catholic, being raised in this suburban environment with nothing but the mall was not just self-limiting, but in fact created all these impositions of racial categories and racial violence, of patriarchal violence. And he wanted to do everything he could in order not just to address his needs and desires, but also be an act of solidarity with those who are resisting against racism and patriarchy. But if it wasn't for these original and initial experiences, of which he had an opportunity to reflect on the kind of work he was forced to do and the kind of schooling he was forced to do, if he didn't have an opportunity to reflect on that, he never would have been radicalized. So in fact, my buddy Tom refused schooling, refused work, created this other kind of life, and then it led to all these other things and other opportunities of him questioning his masculinity, questioning how patriarchy functioned, question how relationships functioned, et cetera, et cetera. So the story that I begin in the book is that this is not uncommon. This is actually quite common. But also, Tom's story is interesting because Tom's story is similar to my story. And since we grew up together, it's not terribly surprising. But I think there's so many other stories. For instance, Nat Turner, who the American slave who led a major slave rebellion, speaks about in his confessions about how running away, stealing food, breaking tools, right? All these kind of forms of everyday resistance that he was involved in led him to then lead a major slave rebellion. So I want people to think about how these smaller kind of daily activities actually lead to other kinds of activities, but also these kind of daily activities of slaves breaking tools, running away, burning down the storehouse, burning down the master's barn, slave women poisoning the slave master, how these smaller everyday activities not just lead to overt rebellions and larger kind of activist or militant activities, but in fact they have major effect themselves, right? The Fugitive Slave Act was only needed because in fact slaves were running away in massive numbers. So the kind of activities that militants are involved in their early radicalization process of refusing work actually are not just common to radicals, but are common in general to slaves, to peasants, to folks who work in factories, to folks who work in coffee shops, et cetera, right? So how does this larger set of collective life and everyday resistances contribute to revolutionary movements, to crises in capitalism, to, in fact, slaves liberating themselves, to the need for the Green Revolution as a way of disciplining and undercutting the power that peasants had gained around the world. How the neoliberal shock doctrine was needed in order to discipline the working class on a global level in order to reinstitute particular levels of capitalist power, right? This is constant ongoing struggle that's taking place in everyday life that very often bubbles up into capitalist and global crises, responses by the state, right? Like incarceration is a massive response to Black liberation struggles. So how, in fact, are these ongoing struggles taking place in overt ways and then in everyday ways? So what I'm trying to do in the book is somewhat capture the similarity between these kind of forms. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. So with all of this, this everyday resistance that's going on, sometimes, on purpose, sometimes unknowingly, what's kind of like your favorite one out of all of them that people are participating in or can participate in?
I think my personal favorite, and this unfortunately is going to mean I'm never going to get a goddamn job again. You don't write a book about like how to steal shit at work and then think your ass is going to get hired. I think, the simple thing is just theft at work, right? Mm-hmm. Theft of time and resources. The vast majority of the planet for the last 500 years has had their everyday lives turned into labor power. That is, capitalism needs labor power, the worker's ability to work. And this is a Marxian frame, of course. It needs to extract the worker's ability to work in order to produce commodities, in order to sell commodities, to circulate them, to create profit, right? And then do that bullshit all over again. So in my frame, in the theoretical traditions I work within, capitalism is the endless imposition of work. You impose work so you can impose more work, and then they impose more work. Because if you can't impose work, You can't produce commodities. You can't sell commodities. You can't have capitalist markets. So the whole purpose of this fucked up system is to impose work and then more work. And by that, I mean you have to impose work on people on the job, right? Someone shows up, as I did at my first job at McDonald's at 14, 15, and you have to get as much out of them as possible in the time that they're there, that you're paying, quote unquote, paying them for, in the view of the capitalist. In the same sense, that work is also being imposed on the general population, because if you don't work, you don't get an income. If you don't get an income, you can't feed and clothe yourself, right? So, in fact, being unemployed or being unable to access work or access income is really fucking difficult in a capitalist society, because we've done away with every other means of survival. Mm-hmm. So the fact that work is being imposed both on the job and then on the larger population, on the larger working class, means that people need ways then to resist that, both on an everyday basis and in a larger basis. So people come up with other mechanisms and means of survival. But my personal favorite is theft at work, because everyone fucking does it, right? Robin D.G. Kelly talks about in one of his books about how he worked at McDonald's like I did as a kid. And toward the end of the shift, they'd make a whole bunch of shitty hamburgers to eat because they knew that they wouldn't be sold at the end of the night and they could take them home. Everybody does this, right? I did that. And one of the reasons I went vegan is because I worked at McDonald's as a early teenager and found that shit fucking hideous. And the idea of eating animals hideous, and shifted my entire dietary and then in a lot of ways lifestyle as a result of that, right? So those kind of experiences led to other kinds of experiences. But everyone steals on the job. Like, you might steal time in the sense that you're expected to do a 10-minute break in Oregon twice a shift in an 8-hour shift, right? So you work 8 to 4, at 10 o'clock you take a break, at 2 o'clock you take a break. And you might get 10 minutes, but you got to call your buddy, and you're on the phone with your buddy for 15 minutes, so you kind of sleek back in after 15 minutes. So you've stolen back that kind of time. Mm-hmm. And people do this all the time, because if you work 8 to 4 or 8 to 5 or 8 to 6, as many of us do, how the fuck do you book a doctor's appointment, right? How do you pay a bill that you missed? How do you actually go about dealing with your life? And you can't do that when you're stuck at some shit job all the time. So you come up with other ways of doing that. And the only way to do that is to steal time back from your boss. And people do this. People who are like pro-work, celebrate the Protestant work ethic, think that you could liberate yourself through work, that hard work is, important, or yada, yada, yada. And they still are going to steal time back, because it's the only way to survive under a capitalist society. So time theft, or theft of materials, right? You work food service and your boss doesn't give you a break to eat. When they turn around, you take a bite of something. This is ongoing. It takes place in every workplace you could possibly imagine, even among people who wouldn't identify themselves as radical or even identify what they're doing as stealing time.
I've always loved the meme. They make $1, I make a dime. That's why I poop on company time.
And you take a long, luxurious shit too, right?
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Of course. When I can't get Wi-Fi in the toilet, I'm just fucked.
Yep. Yeah, well, what are you supposed to be doing on your phone, right?
Exactly. No, but I love that, because it's so true. So my 8 to 5 is in a normal office environment, and there is lots of people who make way fucking more than anyone ever should, and they're doing the exact same thing, right? It's just that everyone has this struggle that they have to fight against.
We have an entire society of which is based upon work and the endless imposition of work, right? Everyone must work. That is the Protestant work ethic. That's how we're raised. That's what we're expected to do. Regardless if that work should never exist in the first place, if that work is producing terrible effects for the society of which we are part, if it's harming workers, harming animals, harming all kinds of things, right? So the question is not just simply how do we resist work, but I never understood anarchists or Marxists or other radicals who thought we could just get rid of exploitation but keep the work, right? Like, no. No, work is the fucking problem. Work is the primary problem, that you have to work in order to survive, right? We've decided that human beings who don't work or don't want to work, which is most of us, or aren't able to access work, are not worthy of existence, right? Of food, clothing, shelter, education, socialization, all these kind of things. So in fact, most of the work you probably do in your office is most of the work that I've ever done in an office, you could probably do in half the time, right?
Fuck yeah.
If you were like, hey, I'm going to pay you the same, but you can knock this shit out and get out of here in 4 hours, bam, you do that and get the fuck out of there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, you need to like stretch it out. You need to do this. And then, of course, something's going to come up where the boss is like, oh, we fucked, I don't know what kind of office work you do, but like we fucked up getting this project out. And now you need to do 12 hours of work in 8 hours. But in fact, you're going to kill yourself and then go home exhausted all week trying to do that. So even the pace of work we don't control, the kind of work that we do we don't control. You could probably come up with a dozen ways of making your job easier, but you have no control over that. So in fact, if we had a different kind of relationship to the things that need to be done in our society so that people could be fed, clothed, housed, educated, entertained, et cetera, if in fact we didn't have a capitalist system, then in fact, the kind of life activities we can be involved in would not just be satisfying, but also we'd undermine and attack the gendered division of labor, right? Who does what kinds of work? And one of the themes that I bring up in the book, and this is drawing from scholarship from people like feminist Sylvia Federici or the Wages for Housework campaign, is that work is not just simply what we get paid for. As I mentioned earlier, capitalism requires labor power, the worker's ability to work, right? They don't hire a worker. They hire the ability to work and the expenditure of labor power in a particular time period or for a particular task. The most important commodity for capitalism is labor power. Without that, there is nothing. And those who are predominantly reproducing labor power are women and gender nonconforming people, and they're doing it without a wage, right? So in fact, housework, childcare, elder care, cooking, cleaning, shopping, all that shit is being done in order to reproduce a commodity for capitalism that capitalism requires. And the people doing that on two levels are being exploited. One, because they're not being paid a wage for this work which they're performing. And two, it's presumed that women and gender nonconforming people that are not cisgendered men, just are naturally caring, and that's why they do this work, which is a mechanism of exploitation, right? So how do we not just refuse shitty jobs, but how do we refuse this entire apparatus of work that requires us to do, or certain embodied people to do, free labor, and the rest of us to do free labor and shitty labor, right? So it's what feminists in the 70s called the double shift. You go work your shit job for 8 hours a day, and then you come home and do another 8-hour shift for free. So how do we unravel, and how do we challenge, and how do we address this entire regime of work of which we're all ensconced and unfortunately have imposed upon us? And what I'm interested in the book is how people are resisting that work. How are people resisting housework? How are people resisting care work? How are people resisting factory work? How are people resisting in slave societies and peasant societies, and then what I call throughout the industrial and social factory, right? The shift from material production to service production or cafe work, et cetera, right? So how do people refuse that? Because I don't think we sit in some room or on a podcast and figure out how to do that. People are actually already doing that. And that's where we begin. We begin by looking at the struggles, on reading those struggles, circulating those struggles by reflecting back upon them, and then organizing from that point. We don't organize from a point of deficit or the idea that people are uneducated, unagitated, and unorganized, which is the fundamental underlying assumption of both left and radical movements, is that people are not educated, not organized, and not agitated. And you can, obviously switch those three words around in various ways, depending on what your particular political position is. But I think that underlying assumption that all left organizing is based upon is empirically wrong. I think if we actually look at the world as it is, and I think we look at the last 500 years of capitalism, in fact, people are organized. People are surviving. People are refusing the imposition of work. They're refusing the state. They're refusing all kinds of repressive and exploitative social relationships. And I think if we go from the position that, in fact, people are resisting rather than they aren't, then, in fact, we listen to what people have to say. We meet them where they're at, not where we want them to be, to use an old additive of church-based and union-based organizing, right? So the argument in the book is, let's take these everyday resistances and these struggles seriously.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. How can people find your book?
They can find the book on akpress.org. I still think for a couple more weeks, and probably while this is airing, it'll still be 25% off. AK, when they come out with new books, always put out a quick little discount. So people can get it on Amazon.com. They can go to my website, which is warmachines.info, and find out more about the book. They can read excerpts there, et cetera, et cetera.
They also have their Fuck the Fourth annual sale right now.
Ooh, that's exciting. So, yeah.
Anyways, I don't know. Yeah. Well, there's so many questions that I didn't get a chance to talk to you about. We'll have to have you on sometime in the future because there's just so much about this that I love to discuss.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Yeah. No, thank you. Have a wonderful weekend.
Hey, you guys too. Take care.
Okay,
Right,
thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always,
hey, it's Kevin Van Meter from Portland, Oregon. Fuck, shit, damn. Fuck, shit, damn.